Imagine this. It is the winter of 1923 in Germany. A family huddles around their stove. Not burning wood or coal, they are burning stacks of their own life savings, bundles of ragsmarks, just to stay warm. Why? Because the paper money had become so worthless, it was literally cheaper to use it as kindling than to buy actual firewood. These were not fools or gamblers. They were teachers, doctors, factory workers, people who had done everything right. They saved diligently for decades. They trusted government bonds, pension plans, bank accounts, and overnight, every mark they ever earned turned into fuel for the fire. Meanwhile, a small group of people who held 6 very different things came through the same collapse, not just surviving, but with their purchasing power completely intact. I have seen the exact same split play out in Zimbabwe 2008, where people wallpapered their homes with $100 trillion notes because the bills were worth more as decoration than as money. In Lebanon since 2019, hard-working nurses and teachers watched their lifetime savings, frozen in their own bank accounts, lose over 95% of their value in just a few years. This is not random chaos. It is a pattern that repeats every single time a currency collapses. I went into the primary records, Reichsbank archives, IMF data, World Bank reports, documented eyewitness accounts, and pulled out the 6 assets that the historical record shows survived every major collapse of the last 100 years. Now, before we get into number 1, I need to tell you about number 6 right now, because when I found it in the primary sources, it genuinely surprised me. It is the only asset on this entire list that requires 0 capital to acquire. It cannot be confiscated by any government. It cannot be frozen in a banking system. It cannot be inflated away. And in the documented extremes of Zimbabwe and Venezuela, it allowed people to maintain purchasing power when gold, land, and financial assets were often inaccessible. Most financial channels never even mention it. We are going to get there. But the first 5 build the full picture. So stay with me through each one. I am not here to tell you what to buy or what to sell. I am a financial historian, and my only aim is to show you what the documented record actually says. By the end of this video, you will understand what history shows survived and what history shows failed. Every time a currency has collapsed, what you do with that knowledge is entirely up to you. Before we get to the 6 assets, you need to understand why currency collapse is never accidental. It follows a documented sequence every single time. Stage 1, the government spends more than it collects. Stage 2, it prints money to cover the gap. Stage 3, prices rise faster than wages and people begin losing trust. Stage 4, citizens move into anything real. Stage 5, total collapse or forced currency replacement. Weimar Germany went from 320 marks per dollar in mid-1922 to 4.2 trillion marks per dollar by November 1923. That trajectory is documented by economist Costantino Bresciani-Tironi directly from Reichsbank records in his 1931 study. Venezuela's bolivar went from 10 per dollar to over 1 million per dollar in under a decade. The IMF measured annual inflation at 1,698,000% in 2018. Lebanon's pound collapsed from 1,500 per dollar to 89,000 per dollar between 2019 and 2025. That is World Bank data. Same pattern, same stages, same outcome, every time. Now, let us look at what the historical record shows actually survived when it did. Number 1. Precious metals. Here is the documented math. During the Weimar collapse, those who held paper marks lost everything. 100%. Total wipeout. Those who held gold maintained their purchasing power entirely. Bresciani-Tironi confirmed this directly from Reichsbank records. An ounce of gold bought the same basket of goods before, during, and after the hyperinflation. The currency changed. Gold did not. Same result in Zimbabwe. When the government printed the $100 trillion note, and that note is real, it is in the documented record, those holding physical gold were protected. Same in Venezuela. While the bolivar collapsed, gold retained real value. And in Turkey, gold deposit accounts at Turkish banks more than doubled in a single quarter in 2024 as citizens moved into precious metals ahead of sustained currency debasement. That data is from the Turkish Banking Regulation and Supervision Agency. What the historical record consistently shows about gold is this: it does not need to do anything. No earnings, no dividends. Its entire function, across every documented collapse, has been to hold its real value when paper currency cannot. When fiat currency supply explodes, the purchasing power of each unit collapses. Gold supply cannot be arbitrarily expanded, so its relative value holds. And form has mattered historically. Economist Steve Hanke at Johns Hopkins, who has documented hyperinflations across the modern era, is consistent on this point. Physical gold, in small tradable denominations, functioned as a direct medium of exchange during collapses. Paper gold, ETFs, and certificates are claims on gold through a financial system. In a financial system collapse, that distinction has proven to be significant. Gold holds when currencies fail. That pattern appears again and again across the historical record. But in Weimar Germany, something even more unusual happened. One category of asset allowed certain people not just to preserve wealth, but to expand it dramatically during the collapse itself. We will get there in a moment. First, the next asset the historical record consistently shows: surviving currency crises. Number 2. Foreign hard currencies. The historical record shows that in every major currency collapse, people who held a stable foreign currency preserved purchasing power that those holding only the domestic currency lost entirely. The Lebanon case is one of the most thoroughly documented modern examples. The Lebanese pound had been pegged at $1,500 per dollar since 1997, 22 years of complete stability. Then, the peg broke. By 2025, the official rate hit £89,000 per dollar. World Bank data shows Lebanese deposits denominated in pounds lost more than 95% of their purchasing power. Someone who had saved the equivalent of $50,000 in pound-denominated accounts over a decade of work came out with less than $1,000 in real value. The nominal number in their account stayed exactly the same. The purchasing power simply disappeared. Those who held US dollars outside the banking system maintained their value entirely. Not because the dollar is special in any permanent sense. Swiss francs or euros would have served the same function, but because they held a currency that was not inside the collapsing system. Zimbabwe dollarized itself before the government made it official. People abandoned the Zimbabwe dollar entirely and began transacting in US dollars. Venezuela today conducts major purchases in dollars, even though the bolivar is technically still legal tender. Argentina holds an estimated $200 billion in physical US currency outside its banking system. These are not investment decisions. They are the instinctive response of populations that have lived through monetary collapse and trust the historical evidence of their own experience. The historical record also shows that capital controls, governments restricting the movement of money abroad, have appeared in nearly every documented collapse as one of the earliest institutional responses to a currency under pressure. It is a pattern worth understanding simply as financial history. Number 3. Productive land. Not land as an abstract financial category. Productive land, the kind that grows food, holds minerals, or generates something people cannot stop needing regardless of what is happening to the currency. In Weimar Germany, Adam Ferguson documented in When Money Dies that farmers who owned their land outright became the economic survivors of the collapse almost overnight. They negotiated payment in gold, in foreign currency, or in goods. A single pig traded for furniture that had cost a city worker 3 months of salary. This is not an exaggeration. It is directly from the documented historical record. The same pattern appeared in Zimbabwe 2008. Farmers with productive land had something people would exchange anything for. Urban workers with savings accounts denominated in Zimbabwe dollars had nothing. In Hungary's 1945 to 1946, hyperinflation, still the most extreme ever recorded, with prices doubling every 15 hours. Thomas Sargent documented in the ends of 4 big inflations that agricultural landowners were the economic survivors, while urban wage earners on fixed salaries were wiped out. The historical record also shows the limits of land as a crisis asset. It is illiquid, difficult to sell quickly or divide, and in extreme political environments, governments have sometimes taxed it heavily or seized it outright. Zimbabwe's farm confiscations in the early 2000s are a documented example. Land has historically preserved real value, but the record is clear that it is not invulnerable. Land produces something humans cannot live without: food. And that made landowners some of the most economically resilient people during major monetary collapses. But the next category preserved something just as essential during hyperinflation: shelter. Number 4, real estate. A building is a physical object that people need. Its replacement cost, the labor, the steel, the concrete, has historically risen alongside everything else when currency collapses. It exists outside the currency system in a way that paper assets do not. In Weimar, Germany, apartment owners in Berlin watched nominal values skyrocket into meaningless billions of marks. But when the Rentenmark replaced the collapsed currency in November 1923, those buildings were still standing, still collecting rent, still worth real purchasing power. Ferguson documented this directly in When Money Dies. Those who held paper marks came out with nothing. Those who held buildings came out whole. Post-Soviet Russia told the same story. As the ruble disintegrated in the early 1990s, apartment owners in Moscow found that their real estate, often acquired for almost nothing during privatization, had become their most valuable possession by far. Everything denominated in rubles evaporated. The walls and the roof remained. A building has utility that does not depend on what any government decides to call money. That physical independence from the monetary system is what the historical record consistently points to. Buildings survived the collapse because they existed outside the monetary system. But the next category challenges one of the biggest assumptions people carry into financial history. Because the documented record shows that one specific type of paper asset actually preserved real wealth during hyperinflation, while other paper assets were completely destroyed. Number 5, shares in companies with real physical operations. During the Weimar hyperinflation, the German stock market made certain shareholders genuinely wealthy in real terms, not in worthless nominal marks, but in actual preserved purchasing power. Gerald Feldman documented this extensively in The Great Disorder in 1993. The most documented case is Hugo Stinnes. In 1921, Stinnes borrowed massive quantities of paper marks from German banks. He used those marks to acquire factories, coal mines, steel plants, and shipping companies. When the currency collapsed, he repaid his loans in the same now worthless marks. His debts died with the currency. His physical assets did not. By 1923, Feldman documented that Stinnes controlled somewhere between a fifth and a quarter of Germany's entire industrial capacity. He borrowed in paper and repaid in paper. He owned in steel and coal and ships. But here is the distinction the historical record draws very clearly. What failed in the German stock market was shares in financial companies, banks, insurance firms, mortgage lenders. Their assets were themselves denominated in marks. When the mark died, their asset base died with it. Industrial companies, the ones that owned factories, mines, land, and physical infrastructure, preserved their real value because their underlying assets existed independent of the currency. A coal mine does not stop being a coal mine because the mark collapsed. Bresciani Tironi confirmed this in his 1931 study. Industrial shares preserved between 50 and 100% of their real dollar equivalent value, even as paper marks went to zero. The Caracas Stock Exchange rose over 73,000% in Bolivar terms in 2018. Companies with physical operations preserved real value, while Bolivar bonds and Bolivar savings became worthless. Same mechanism, different continent, different decade, identical pattern. The historical distinction is not between stocks and no stocks. It is between ownership of real physical things and ownership of paper claims on a failing currency. Now, number 6. I almost left this off the list entirely, but after going through the documented accounts from Zimbabwe and Venezuela, leaving it off felt like an incomplete picture, because in the most extreme conditions, where every financial instrument had failed, where banks were closed, where gold was impossible to find, and foreign currency was unavailable, this is what the historical record shows kept people economically functional. Marketable skills. In Zimbabwe between 2007 and 2009, the formal economy essentially stopped functioning. Banks were technically open, but operationally useless. BBC and Guardian reporting from this period documented an informal barter economy where skilled labor became the fundamental unit of exchange. A mechanic was paid in fuel, a plumber was paid in food, doctors moved to private practice and accepted payment in whatever the patient had of real value. The skill became the currency had become the problem. In Venezuela, during the peak crisis years, Reuters documented cases of doctors and engineers whose government salaries in bolivars had collapsed to the equivalent of $2 to $5 per month. Those who transitioned to private arrangements, accepting food, hard currency, or goods as direct payment, maintained their economic position. Those who remained on fixed government salaries did not. In Hungary's 1946 hyperinflation, Sargent documented that skilled workers who could set their own price per job maintained their living standard, while government employees on fixed salaries were systematically eroded by the inflation. What the historical record shows, consistently, is that a marketable skill is the one form of economic value that cannot be confiscated by a government decree, cannot be frozen by a banking restriction, cannot be eroded by currency debasement, and requires no capital to acquire. In the documented collapses of the last 100 years, it functioned as a form of economic resilience that no financial instrument could replicate in the most extreme conditions. That is not a motivational observation. That is what the primary sources actually document. Now, the final part of this historical picture. The assets that the record shows went to zero. I saved these for last, because understanding what failed is just as important as understanding what survived. History is only useful if we look at the whole picture. The first category that failed consistently, fixed income securities denominated in the collapsing currency, government bonds, Treasury notes, any instrument where the holder was a creditor of the failing state. In Weimar Germany, German savings accounts held approximately 300 billion marks in aggregate in 1919. By November 1923, the entire sum, every savings account in the country combined, was worth less than 1 US cent in real purchasing power, documented by Bresciani Tironi directly from Reichsbank records. In Argentina 2001, bondholders saw nominal value cut by 70% in debt restructuring, and even that reduced amount required years of legal disputes to recover. A bond is a claim denominated in the currency itself. When the currency collapses, the claim collapses with it. The historical record on this point is unambiguous. The second category, savings accounts in domestic currency inside failing banking systems, Lebanese deposits denominated in pounds lost more than 95% of purchasing power between 2019 and 2024. World Bank data. People who placed savings in pound deposits in 2019 retained roughly 2 cents on every dollar by 2024. The nominal balance in their accounts stayed exactly the same. The purchasing power disappeared silently while they watched. The third category, life insurance policies and pension plans denominated in the failing currency. Adam Ferguson preserved a letter from a retired German school teacher in When Money Dies. She had a savings account, government bonds, and a life insurance policy. She had saved her entire adult life. She was never reckless or extravagant. By autumn 1923, she could not afford to heat her apartment. She wrote that she had done everything the right way. She had. The monetary system that denominated everything she had built simply did not hold. That letter is one of the most important primary documents in the literature of monetary history. Not because it is dramatic, but because it is ordinary. It is the record of what happens to ordinary people when a monetary system fails and their savings are entirely inside it. That is what 100 years of documented monetary history actually looks like. 6 categories of assets that held value across every major collapse. 3 categories that the record shows failed every time. Not theory, not prediction, just the forensic evidence of what has already happened in documented detail across 4 different countries and 4 different decades. History does not tell us what will happen next, but it does show us, with remarkable consistency, what has happened before. And that record belongs to everyone who is willing to look at it honestly. If this historical record changed the way you think about money and financial history, consider subscribing for more forensic breakdowns like this one. And tell me in the comments, which of the 6 surprised you the most? I read every one. In the next video, we go deeper into one of these assets, the one with a 500-year documented record across major monetary disruptions. And where it sits today relative to that 500-year history is one of the most striking data points in this entire field of research.